Life has a way of throwing us into situations we neither expect nor desire. For me, that was being thrust into the Hartman family, a whirlwind of pretension, disdain, and contempt. At the center of this tornado were Mr. and Mrs. Hartman, my in-laws, who seemed to have developed an aversion to me from our very first meeting. I remember the day I was introduced to them. Ethan had described his parents as traditional and a bit set in their ways, but that did little to prepare me for what lay ahead. As we entered the lavish Hartman residence, Ethan whispered in my ear, "Just be yourself. They'll love you." I squeezed his hand in acknowledgement, trying to draw strength from his words. "Ah, there's the boy," Mr. Hartman exclaimed, embracing Ethan. His tall, lean frame and salt and pepper hair gave him an air of authority. As they exchanged pleasantries, Mrs. Hartman's eyes were already on me, scrutinizing every inch. With her sharp cheekbones and pursed lips, she looked every bit the matriarch of the family. "And who is this young lady?" she asked, her voice dripping with feigned sweetness. "This is Amanda, Mom," Ethan introduced me with a hopeful tone. "A doctor, I hear?" Mr. Hartman inquired, raising an eyebrow. "Yes, sir," I replied, trying to sound confident. "I work at St. Paul's Hospital." Mrs. Hartman scoffed. "A woman doctor. That's rather ambitious, isn't it? There are more traditional roles for women, after all." Ethan, sensing the tension, tried to lighten the mood. "Well, she's one of the best. Saved countless lives. I'm really proud of her." Mr. Hartman nodded, but his eyes betrayed his skepticism. All well and good, but family should come first. A demanding profession can often come at the cost of one's personal life. Mrs. Hartman sneered, adding, "Not to mention, there's a difference between making money and having class. Let's hope you understand that, dear." The evening was filled with veiled insults and snide remarks. Every achievement of mine was downplayed, every decision questioned. By the time we left, I felt like a deflated balloon, drained of all confidence and self-worth. On our drive back, Ethan tried to console me. "They just need time, Amanda. They'll come around." But as days turned into months and months into years, I realized that the Hartmans weren't going to come around. This was their nature, critical, condescending, and downright cruel. Little did I know then that our lives were set on a collision course and that a chance encounter on a busy street would change everything. The streets of our town, always bustling with life and energy, were a place of escape for me. People went about their business, engrossed in their own little worlds. It was here, amidst the crowd, that I felt truly anonymous, sheltered from the judgment and hostility of the Hartmans. That fateful day started like any other. The morning sun bathed the streets in a golden hue, and there was a pleasant nip in the air. My day had been rewarding so far, successfully completing a surgery that would change a young man's life forever. I was in high spirits as I walked out of my office, eager to share the day's successes with Ethan. Lost in my thoughts, I barely noticed the familiar black sedan parked by the sidewalk. It was only when a shrill voice pierced through the din of the crowd that I realized I wasn't alone. "Amanda!" Mrs. Hartman's voice echoed, dripping with disdain. I turned to find her, and Mr. Hartman emerging from a nearby cafe. Her eyes, always sharp, now burned with a particular ferocity, and there was no mistaking the smug satisfaction on Mr. Hartman's face. "A doctor, and still walking on these streets like an ordinary person, thinking a bit too highly of ourselves, aren't we?" Desperate to avoid a scene, I tried to keep my composure. "Mrs. Hartman, I hope you're having a good day. Please excuse me, I need to get home." But she wasn't done. With a wicked gleam in her eye, she continued, "You think being a doctor makes you special. There are far better professions out there that don't involve poking and prodding people." Mr. Hartman chuckled, joining in the mockery. "Yes, ones that demand real intellect, not just memorizing books and cutting people open." Passers-by began to slow down, casting curious glances our way. My cheeks burned with embarrassment. I felt like a spectacle, and every word from the Hartmans was like a dagger through my heart. Attempting to stand my ground, I retorted, "Every profession has its value, Mrs. Hartman. I respect yours, and I expect the same in return." She laughed, a cruel, cold sound that sent chills down my spine. "Respect? From the likes of us? My dear, you'll never be one of us, no matter how many degrees you have." With a final contemptuous glance, the duo sauntered off, leaving me standing amidst the hushed whispers of the crowd. The weight of public humiliation was suffocating, and I rushed away, tears threatening to spill. It was clear that the Hartmans' animosity wasn't just reserved for closed doors and family gatherings. They wanted to tear me down, publicly and unabashedly. But little did they know, their actions that day would set in motion a series of events that neither of us could have foreseen. The facade of our cozy little home offered a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. The white picket fence, the manicured garden, everything seemed so deceptively serene. As I stepped inside, the familiar scent of freshly baked bread and Ethan's soft humming in the kitchen greeted me. This was our sanctuary, our haven from the outside world. But today, the walls seemed to close in on me. The weight of public humiliation bore down, making each step heavier than the last. As I walked into the living room, Ethan looked up, immediately sensing that something was amiss. The usually bright room, with its soft beige walls adorned with memories of our time together, felt overshadowed by the events of the day. "Amanda, what happened?" Ethan's voice was laced with concern, his eyes searching mine for answers. Taking a deep breath, I recounted the harrowing encounter with his parents. With each word, Ethan's expression darkened, his fists clenched involuntarily. "They did what? In public?" He was visibly shaken. I nodded, the tears I had held back earlier now flowing freely. "Ethan, I can't do this anymore. Every glance, every word, it's like they're tearing me apart. I feel so diminished." He rushed over, enveloping me in a comforting embrace. For a few minutes, we just stood there, drawing strength from each other. Pulling away slightly, he looked deep into my eyes. "Amanda, I love you. I won't let them hurt you anymore. We need to make a decision." Wiping away my tears, I replied, "Ethan, I don't want to come between you and your family, but I can't be a part of this toxicity. It's draining me emotionally and mentally." Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know. It's just, they're my parents. I thought they'd come around, but after today, it's clear they won't." We sat on the couch, holding hands, lost in our thoughts. The gravity of the situation was palpable. We had reached a breaking point. After what felt like hours, Ethan finally broke the silence. "We need distance, Amanda. As much as it hurts, we need to cut ties. For us, for our future." I nodded, relief flooding over me. As the night deepened, we discussed the logistics, avoiding family gatherings, setting boundaries, and prioritizing our relationship above all else. It wasn't going to be easy, but we were determined. This chapter in our lives marked a significant turning point. While we hoped for reconciliation in the distant future, for now, we chose ourselves and the love we shared. The Hartmans' reign of terror had come to an end, or so we thought. The month following our decision was a breath of fresh air. The oppressive weight of the Hartmans' judgment had lifted, replaced by a newfound freedom. We fell into a comfortable rhythm, focusing on our work and cherishing the time spent together. The raw wounds began to heal, though scars of past encounters remained, a testament to our struggles. But fate, with its unpredictable twists and turns, had different plans. It was a brisk evening, the hospital corridors echoing with the regular hustle and bustle. My duties for the day were nearly wrapped up, and I was looking forward to a quiet evening with Ethan. Our favorite Italian restaurant had just introduced a new menu, and we had plans to sample the delicacies. The nurse's urgent voice snapped me back to reality. "Dr. Amanda, we have an emergency in room 407. Making my way to the designated room, I went through the patient's file. My heart skipped a beat as I saw the name, Martha Hartman. As I entered, I found Mrs. Hartman wincing in pain, her face contorted. "A fall," the note said, "possible fractured leg." Our eyes met. There was a fleeting moment of recognition, followed by her typical haughtiness. "You? What are you doing here?" "Trying to maintain a professional demeanor," I replied. "Mrs. Hartman, I'm the attending doctor for this shift. Please, let's focus on your injury." She scoffed. "Well, isn't this just perfect? My fate in the hands of the person I least expected." Mr. Hartman, who had been silent till now, chimed in. "Amanda, maybe it's best if you call another doctor." Swallowing my emotions, I responded, "I assure you, my personal feelings will not interfere with my professional duties. If you still have reservations, I can arrange for another doctor." "Mrs. Hartman, perhaps out of pain or sheer stubbornness?" snapped. "Just get on with it." As the examination proceeded, I couldn't help but marvel at the twist of fate. Here was the woman who had publicly humiliated me, rendered vulnerable and at my mercy. It was a situation I had never envisioned. As I left the room after ensuring Mrs. Hartman was comfortably settled, I couldn't shake off the mixed feelings that plagued me. There was sympathy, yes, but also a perverse sense of satisfaction. The tables had turned, and the next moves were uncertain. Little did I know that this unexpected rendezvous would pave the way for a revenge plot, where motions would clash, alliances would be formed, and the very essence of our relationship with the Hartmans would be tested. The hushed tones of the hospital's break room provided a stark contrast to the intensity of the emotions churning within me. A cup of lukewarm coffee in hand, I found myself surrounded by my colleagues, some familiar faces, and some newer ones. The recent interaction with Mrs. Hartman was fresh in my mind, the sting of years of humiliation refusing to fade. "Everyone, I need to share something," I began, my voice hesitant but gradually gaining strength. I recounted the torments I had endured at the hands of the Hartmans, detailing the public humiliations and covert insults. The room was silent, save for the low hum of the vending machine and the occasional shuffle of feet. Dr. Ramos, a seasoned pediatrician with kind eyes and an ever-present smile, shook her head in disbelief. "Amanda, I had no idea you were going through this." Dr. Anwar, a young and passionate cardiologist, clenched his fist. "It's unacceptable. Just because your family doesn't give them the right to treat you this way." The murmur of agreement rippled through the room. It was Dr. Stevens, though, the respected orthopedic surgeon, who brought the conversation to its crux. Pushing back his glasses and meeting my gaze, he said, "Amanda, I'm handling Mrs. Hartman's case. And while we always strive to provide the best care, sometimes situations require special considerations." I looked at him quizzically. "What do you have in mind?" A smirk played on his lips. "Let's just say the Hartmans have enjoyed their wealth for a long time. Maybe it's time they feel a pinch." Dr. Ramos chuckled. "Oh, Stevens, always the mischievous one. But honestly, Amanda, he has a point. Sometimes people need a taste of their own medicine." I pondered over the proposal. The weight of years of torment seemed to validate the idea of revenge, however unethical it may sound. Dr. Anwar leaned in, excitement evident in his voice. "Imagine their faces when they see the bill. I say we make it a team effort." The room erupted in laughter and enthusiastic planning. Suggestions ranged from charging for exclusive hospital rooms to imported medical equipment. It felt cathartic, the camaraderie of my colleagues acting as a balm for old wounds. Finally, it was Dr. Stevens who concluded, "All right, folks, it's decided then. Mrs. Hartman will receive the best care, but it'll come at a cost. She won't forget." I smiled, gratitude swelling in my heart. Thank you, everyone. It's not about the money. It's about sending a message. The room nodded in agreement, the atmosphere electric with anticipation. The stage was set. Revenge, as they say, was on the horizon. The hours following our vengeful plan felt like a blur. The hospital corridors resonated with the usual hum of activity, but beneath that veneer of normalcy, anticipation buzzed in the air. Every glance exchanged with my colleagues held a silent understanding. Every smirk, a nod to our collective mischief. As the evening lights of the hospital flickered to life, casting soft, diffused glows along the hallway, Mrs. Hartman's discharge process was initiated. The paperwork was impeccable, detailing every procedure, every consultation, every piece of equipment used. It was a masterpiece of medical bureaucracy. I was in an adjacent room when I heard the unmistakable sound of Mrs. Hartman's voice, a hint of her usual arrogance mellowed by her recent ordeal. The wheels of her chair squeaked rhythmically as she was guided to the exit. Waiting by the exit was Dr. Stevens, clutching an envelope. The bill. His posture was the picture of professional courtesy, but there was a glint in his eye that betrayed his true emotions. "Mrs. Hartman," Dr. Stevens began, extending the envelope towards her, "here's the bill for your treatment. We wish you a speedy recovery." The moment felt almost cinematic. The entire corridor seemed to hold its breath as Mrs. Hartman, with trembling hands, opened the envelope and scanned the contents. Her usual sharp eyes widened in disbelief, darting from one exorbitant charge to another. $50,000? Her voice rose several octaves, echoing off the sterile walls. How? How is this possible? Dr. Stevens, his expression the very picture of innocence, replied, "Well, fractures can be quite complicated, Mrs. Hartman. We utilized top-of-the line equipment and consulted several specialists to ensure you received the best care." Mr. Hartman, always her staunch ally, interjected, "This is outrageous. We demand an itemized breakdown." Before Dr. Stevens could respond, I stepped out from the shadows, our eyes locking for what felt like an eternity. The weight of our shared history hung palpably in the air. Taking a deep breath, I said, "Mrs. Hartman, we at St. Paul's Hospital always prioritize our patients' well-being. We believe in delivering unparalleled care, regardless of the costs." Her face, a shade of deep crimson, contorted in fury. She seemed to search for words, but they eluded her. Finally, with a huff, she spat out, "You will regret this, Amanda." I met her gaze, unflinching. "I already regret many things, Mrs. Hartman. One more won't make a difference." As she was wheeled away, her mutterings and curses faded with distance. The tension in the air dissipated, replaced by a quiet sense of triumph. While the victory was sweet, its repercussions were unknown. The final chapter of our saga with the Hartmans was yet to be written, but for now, the scales had tipped in our favor. The game of revenge had been played, and we had emerged victorious. The gentle rustle of the evening breeze, the chirping of crickets, and the soft glow from the street lamps painted a serene picture. As I settled into the wicker chair on my porch, the events of the day played in my mind like a movie reel. The adrenaline of the earlier confrontation had subsided, replaced by a myriad of emotions. Triumph, relief, but also doubt. With a glass of wine in hand, I pondered the line I had crossed. Revenge, while momentarily satisfying, had brought with it a slew of unintended consequences. The quiet of the night, once a source of solace, now echoed with unanswered questions. The creaking of the front door announced Ethan's presence. He stepped onto the porch, his face a canvas of conflicting emotions. Taking a seat beside me, he took a deep breath, searching for the right words. "Amanda," he began hesitantly, "what happened today? I never imagined we'd go down this path." I took a sip of my wine, letting the silence stretch for a moment. "Ethan, I know, but after years of their torment, it felt It felt like justice. Ethan looked out into the distance, the dim light casting shadows on his face. Justice or revenge? There's a fine line between the two. Feeling defensive, I replied, "They humiliated me, belittled me at every turn. Today, they got a taste of their own medicine." Ethan nodded slowly. "I understand your pain, Amanda. I've lived with their prejudices and judgments all my life, but escalating things this way, it worries me. The chasm between our families is now a gaping abyss." The weight of his words hung heavy in the air. I knew he was right. In our quest for retribution, we had jeopardized any chance of reconciliation. Maybe they'll finally realize the pain they've caused, I mused, hope seeping into my voice. Ethan took my hand, squeezing it gently. Or maybe they'll come back, more vengeful than ever. My parents have never been ones to back down. A chill ran down my spine. The repercussions of our actions had set the stage for further confrontations. The thought was unsettling. As the night deepened, we sat in contemplative silence. The journey ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges and potential conflicts. But one thing was clear. The message had been sent loud and clear. No one messes with Dr. Amanda. Yet, in the depths of my heart, I couldn't help but wonder if the price of that message was too high. Only time would tell.